In the vast expanse of the universe, where species rise and fall across millennia, there exists one universal truth that every advanced civilization learns: some planets are simply impossible. They defy physics, mock biology, and laugh at the carefully constructed laws that govern reality itself. When humanity stumbled upon Zirion Prime, they thought they had discovered paradise. A world where gravity flows upward in certain regions, where time moves differently depending on your location, and where the very ground beneath your feet can think and feel. The Galactic Council had classified it as a Class X anomaly, a death trap that had consumed 17 different expedition teams from the most advanced species in known space. But humans? Humans looked at this impossible world and saw something else entirely. They saw home. What the galaxy didn't understand was that humanity had spent their entire existence on a planet that shouldn't have worked either. Earth, with its chaotic weather systems, deadly wildlife, and the bizarre ability to support life despite being bombarded by cosmic radiation, had been preparing humans for this moment for millions of years. Now, as the greatest minds in the galaxy watch in disbelief, a species they considered barely evolved is not just surviving on Zirion Prime, they're thriving. And, in doing so, they're about to rewrite everything the universe thought it knew about the impossible. Welcome to the story of how humanity turned the galaxy's greatest nightmare into their greatest triumph, and why sometimes the most impossible rules are just waiting for the right species to break them. Captain Sarah Chen had seen her share of impossible things during her 20-year career with the Terran Exploration Corps, but nothing had prepared her for the briefing room's collective silence when Admiral Morrison finished speaking. The holographic display showed a planet that seemed to shimmer and shift, its surface appearing to fold in on itself in ways that made her eyes water. "Let me understand this correctly," Dr. James Okafor finally said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying not to sound incredulous. "The Galactic Council wants us to attempt colonization of a planet that has killed every previous expedition team sent there?" Admiral Morrison's weathered face remained impassive. "Not just killed, Doctor. Consumed. The last transmission from the Altarian science vessel was their chief researcher screaming about the mountains eating his equipment before the signal cut to static." Sarah studied the readings scrolling across her tablet. Zirion Prime sat in the habitable zone of a stable G-type star, possessed an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, and showed signs of abundant water. On paper, it looked perfect for human habitation. The problem lay in the details that made no sense according to established physics. "Gravity anomalies in 17 different zones," she read aloud. "Temporal distortions near the polar regions. Electromagnetic signatures suggesting the planet's crust contains naturally occurring superconductors. And this note about responsive geological formations? That's the polite way of saying the rocks move when you're not looking," Morrison replied grimly. "The Zephyrian Mineral Survey team reported that their landing site had completely rearranged itself overnight. Their base camp was found buried under what appeared to be a new mountain range." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the team's xenogeologist, leaned forward with obvious excitement. "Sir, with respect, this could be the scientific discovery of the millennium. A planet with apparent consciousness, geological formations that respond to external stimuli. We could learn more about planetary formation in 6 months than we have in the past century. Assuming we survive the first week," muttered Chief Engineer Rodriguez from across the table. Sarah appreciated his caution. Marcus Rodriguez had kept more exploration teams alive through impossible situations than any other engineer in the Corps. If he was worried, there was good reason. But something about this mission felt different. Not dangerous in the usual way of hostile alien fauna or toxic atmospheres, but challenging in a way that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. "What do we know about the previous expeditions?" she asked. Morrison activated a new display showing 17 different mission profiles. The first was a Centaurian deep space probe, unmanned, launched about 50 years ago. It transmitted for 6 days before going silent. The last signal showed it had somehow ended up 12 kilometers underground, though it had landed on a flat plane. The images continued cycling through the failed missions. The elegant Altarian science vessel twisted into impossible shapes before vanishing entirely. The massive draconian mining operation, where a crew of 300 had simply disappeared, leaving behind only empty habitation domes and equipment that had been partially dissolved by an unknown process. The collective's biosurvey team lasted the longest, Morrison continued. 37 days. Their final reports described plant life that grew in mathematical patterns, water that flowed upward in certain areas, and weather systems that seemed to respond to the team's emotional states. The mission commander's last entry mentioned feeling like the planet was learning about them. Dr. Okafor adjusted his glasses nervously. And now they want to send humans? The council's exact words were that perhaps a less evolved species might have better luck, Morrison said with a slight smile. They seem to think that our alleged lack of sophistication might be an advantage. Sarah felt a familiar surge of irritation at the galactic community's persistent underestimation of humanity. Despite humanity's remarkable adaptability and problem-solving abilities, most alien species still viewed them as crude newcomers to the cosmic stage. The fact that humans had survived and thrived on what most aliens considered a death world like Earth seemed lost on them. "What's our mission profile?" she asked. "Establish a permanent research station. Study the anomalies. Figure out why this planet behaves the way it does. And, most importantly, prove that humans can succeed where 16 other species have failed." The weight of that expectation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Sarah looked around the table at her team. Rodriguez, whose engineering solutions bordered on the miraculous. Dr. Vasquez, whose passion for impossible geology was matched only by her talent for finding patterns in chaos. Dr. Okafor, a xenobiologist who had successfully catalogued lifeforms on 43 different worlds. And Dr. Lisa Park, their theoretical physicist, who had remained conspicuously quiet during the briefing. "Dr. Park," Sarah said. "You've been studying the data. What's your assessment?" The young physicist looked up from her tablet, where equations covered the screen in dense clusters. "I think the planet is trying to communicate." The statement hung in the air for a moment before Dr. Okafor laughed nervously. "Come again?" "Look at the patterns," Park continued, warming to her subject. "The gravity anomalies aren't random. They follow a mathematical sequence. The temporal distortions correspond to electromagnetic fluctuations that repeat in cycles. The geological changes happen in response to specific stimuli. This isn't chaos. This is behavior." "You're suggesting the entire planet is alive?" Vasquez asked. "Not alive in the biological sense. But aware. Responsive. Think of it as a massive, geological-scale intelligence. The previous expeditions failed because they approached Zirion Prime as a resource to be exploited or a puzzle to be solved. Maybe we need to approach it as a neighbor." Sarah felt something click into place. Throughout human history, their greatest successes had come not from conquering hostile environments, but from learning to work with them. Arctic peoples didn't defeat the ice, they became part of it. Desert nomads didn't fight the sand, they learned to flow with it. Pacific Islanders didn't struggle against the ocean, they became one with it. "All right," she said finally. "If the planet wants to play games, we'll learn the rules. But we do this the human way. We adapt, we improvise, and we survive." Questions? Rodriguez raised his hand. "What kind of equipment are we authorized to take?" "Standard exploration package, plus everything on your wish list," Morrison replied. "The Council is throwing resources at this because they desperately want answers. Our transport is the Aurora, a brand new deep space exploration vessel with the latest adaptive shielding and redundant life support systems." "When do we leave?" Vasquez asked eagerly. 2 weeks. Use the time to study everything we have on the previous expeditions. Look for patterns, connections, anything that might give us an edge." As the briefing broke up, Sarah lingered behind with Morrison. "Admiral, off the record, what do you really think happened to those other teams?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, staring at the holographic image of Zirion Prime. "I think they forgot the first rule of exploration, Captain. Never assume you're the dominant intelligence in the room. Or in this case, on the planet." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and research. Sarah found herself spending long hours in the Corps' extensive archives, reading mission reports from the failed expeditions. What struck her was how quickly each team had begun to fragment under the stress of the planet's inexplicable behavior. The Altarians, with their rigid adherence to scientific protocol, had become increasingly frustrated when their instruments failed to provide consistent readings. The Draconians, accustomed to overwhelming any obstacle through sheer technological superiority, had escalated their efforts until something on the planet had apparently escalated back. The Zephyrians had tried to map and categorize every anomaly, growing more desperate as the planet seemed to actively resist their efforts. Dr. Park's theory about planetary intelligence began to make more sense as Sarah studied the data. There was definitely a pattern to the planet's responses, though it was unlike anything in the xenobiological databases. It seemed to escalate its reactions based on the intrusiveness of the expedition's activities. Small-scale exploration met with minor anomalies. Large-scale resource extraction attempts triggered massive geological upheavals. The Aurora was everything Morrison had promised and more. The ship's adaptive systems could modify their configuration in real time, responding to changing conditions with inflexibility that impressed even Rodriguez. Captain Janet Walsh, a veteran of 3 deep space exploration missions, had handpicked her crew for adaptability and quick thinking. "I've heard the stories about this planet," Walsh told Sarah as they approached the Zirian system. "My engineers think we're crazy for attempting this." "Are we?" Sarah asked. Walsh grinned. "Probably. But that's never stopped us before." The journey to Zirian Prime took 3 weeks, during which Sarah's team refined their approach. Rather than attempting to establish a large base immediately, they would start small. A minimal footprint, careful observation, and gradual expansion based on the planet's apparent tolerance levels. "We're treating this like a first contact situation," Sarah explained to the ship's crew during the final briefing. "We don't know what we're dealing with, so we proceed with caution and respect." When Zirian Prime finally appeared on the main display, the entire bridge fell silent. The planet seemed to pulse with an inner light, its surface shifting and flowing in patterns that hurt to watch directly. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, it looked less like a world and more like a living jewel suspended in space. "Preliminary scans are interesting," reported Lieutenant Torres from the science station. "I'm reading normal atmospheric composition, but the electromagnetic patterns are unlike anything in our databases. The planet seems to be generating its own aurora displays, and they're following mathematical sequences." "Dr. Park was right," Sarah murmured. "It is trying to communicate." As the aurora settled into orbit, Sarah felt a strange sense of anticipation. Not fear, exactly, but the same feeling she'd had as a child before diving into a deep, unknown pool. The water might be dangerous, but the only way to find out was to jump in. "Captain Walsh, prepare the landing shuttles," she ordered. "We're going to say hello." The first shuttle touched down on Zirian Prime 6 hours later, in a clearing that had been verified stable through 3 separate orbital scans. Sarah led a minimal team, herself, Dr. Park, and 2 security specialists. The plan was simple: establish basic communication protocols and see how the planet responded. The moment Sarah stepped onto the surface of Zirian Prime, she knew they were no longer dealing with ordinary physics. The gravity felt different here, not heavier or lighter, but somehow more personal, as if it was specifically calibrated for her body mass and density. The air carried a subtle electric charge that made her hair stand on end, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm. "Readings are off the charts," Park reported, her voice filled with excitement. "The electromagnetic field is definitely responding to our presence. It's almost like the planet is taking our measure." Sarah knelt and placed her hand flat against the ground. The surface was warm, despite the planet's distance from its star, and she could swear she felt something like a heartbeat deep beneath the surface. When she stood, the spot where her hand had rested glowed with a faint blue light for several seconds before fading. "Definitely responsive," she murmured. "Let's see if we can establish a pattern." Over the next hour, they conducted simple experiments. Rhythmic tapping on the ground produced corresponding vibrations from below. Light patterns projected onto the surface were reflected back in increasingly complex configurations. Most remarkably, when Dr. Park began sketching mathematical equations in the dirt with a stick, the planet responded by completing them with thin lines of blue light that emerged from the ground. "This is incredible," Park breathed. "It's not just intelligent. It's trying to learn our mathematical frameworks." Sarah activated her communicator. "Chen to Aurora. We've established communication." "Repeat, we have established communication with the planetary intelligence." Captain Walsh's voice crackled back through the static. "Confirmed, Captain Chen. What are your orders?" Sarah looked around at the clearing, which now glowed softly with patterns of blue light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their heartbeats. For the first time in her career, she felt like she was standing on the threshold of something truly extraordinary. Not just first contact with an alien intelligence, but contact with a form of consciousness so vast and alien that it redefined what those concepts meant. "Prepare for extended surface operations," she replied. "We're going to learn how to talk to a planet." As the sun set over Zirion Prime, casting long shadows across the glowing clearing, Sarah felt a deep sense of rightness about their mission. The previous expeditions had failed because they had approached the planet as conquerors or scientists studying a specimen. But humans had always been different. They were the species that made friends with wolves, turned predators into pets, and found ways to thrive in the harshest environments their homeworld could provide. If Zirion Prime wanted to communicate, humanity would learn its language. If it wanted to test them, they would meet every challenge with the stubborn adaptability that had carried their species from cave paintings to starships. And if it wanted to judge whether they were worthy of sharing its surface, Sarah was confident that humans would prove themselves in ways the galaxy had never imagined possible. The stars wheeled overhead, and, beneath their feet, the planet hummed with alien thought. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The morning brought revelations that would have sent any other species fleeing back to orbit. Sarah woke in her temporary shelter to find that the clearing had expanded overnight, growing by exactly the amount needed to accommodate the additional equipment they had requested. More unsettling, the geometric patterns of blue light that had emerged during their communication experiments had evolved into more complex designs that seemed to incorporate elements from human art, mathematics, and even snippets of the music Dr. Park had hummed while working. "Captain," Rodriguez called from outside her shelter, his voice carefully controlled in the way that meant he was either terrified or fascinated. "You need to see this." Sarah emerged to find her chief engineer standing beside a collection of metallic formations that had definitely not been there the night before. They rose from the ground in elegant spirals, their surfaces polished to mirror brightness, reflecting the early morning light in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "The planet grew these?" she asked. "Extruded them, more likely," Rodriguez replied, running his scanner over the nearest formation. "The molecular composition is unlike anything in our databases. It's not quite metal, not quite crystal, but it's definitely artificial. And, get this, the internal structure is optimized for electromagnetic conductivity. These things are antennas." Dr. Park emerged from her own shelter, tablet in hand, eyes bright with scientific excitement. "The mathematical progressions continued all night," she announced. "I've been monitoring the planet's electromagnetic patterns, and it's been working through increasingly complex mathematical concepts. It started with basic arithmetic, moved through algebra and calculus, and, by 0400 hours it was exploring theoretical physics equations that we won't understand for another 50 years. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "It's learning from us. Fast. Faster than fast," Park confirmed. "At the rate it's processing information, it's probably already surpassed human knowledge in several fields. But, here's the interesting part, it's not just learning our science. It's learning our culture. Look at this." Park activated her tablet's projector, showing a three-dimensional representation of the patterns that had appeared overnight. What Sarah saw made her breath catch. Woven throughout the mathematical sequences were unmistakable elements of human artistic expression, musical notations from half a dozen Earth cultures, architectural principles from ancient civilizations, even color patterns that seemed inspired by traditional human textiles. "It's not just studying what we know," Park continued. "It's studying who we are." The implications were staggering. Previous expeditions had approached Zirion Prime with scientific instruments and military-grade equipment, trying to classify and control. The planet had apparently found their purely intellectual approach uninteresting or threatening. But humans, with their tendency to hum while working, to sketch idle drawings in the dirt, to express personality through everything they did, had presented something new, a fusion of intellect and culture that the planetary intelligence found fascinating. Dr. Okafor, what's the biological situation? Sarah asked as the xenobiologist approached their group. Unprecedented, he replied, though his tone was more wonder than concern. The local flora has restructured itself overnight. Not just growing, but actively reorganizing. The plant life is forming patterns that mirror the mathematical sequences the planet has been exploring. But, more than that, they're incorporating elements that can only be described as aesthetic choices. He gestured toward a grove of what had been simple, tree-like organisms the previous day. Now they formed an intricate latticework, their branches growing in precise spirals that created natural amphitheater with acoustics that enhanced human vocal ranges. It was beautiful, functional, and impossible. The planet isn't just learning about us, Sarah realized. It's trying to make us comfortable. As if in response to her words, the ground beneath their feet began to warm slightly, reaching the exact temperature that humans found most pleasant. A gentle breeze started, carrying scents that reminded Sarah of Earth's forests after rain. Rodriguez laughed, a sound that held equal parts amazement and disbelief. It's been listening to us. Not just our words, but our unconscious responses. Our breathing patterns, heart rates, skin temperature. It knows what makes us comfortable better than we do. The communicator crackled with Captain Walsh's voice from orbit. Landing team, we're registering massive changes in the planetary electromagnetic grid. The whole planet seems to be reorganizing itself. Sarah activated her communicator. Walsh, are you saying this is happening planet-wide? Affirmative. We're detecting similar formations appearing at 17 different sites across the surface. All of them in areas that our surveys identified as suitable for human habitation. The magnitude of what was happening began to sink in. Zirion Prime wasn't just responding to their presence in one location. It was preparing itself, on a global scale, to accommodate human colonists. The planetary intelligence had apparently reached a decision about humanity, and that decision was welcome. This changes everything, Dr. Vasquez announced as she joined the group. The xenogeologist had spent the early morning hours studying soil samples and ground-penetrating radar data. The planetary crust is restructuring itself. Not randomly, but according to principles that will optimize human habitation. The ground composition is shifting to support the types of agriculture that humans practice. Mineral distributions are changing to make resources more accessible. Even the water table is being modified. Sarah felt a moment of vertigo as the full implications hit her. It's terraforming itself. For us. Not terraforming, Park corrected. Adapting. Terraforming implies changing the environment to suit a species' needs. This is more like collaborative evolution. The planet is changing itself, but it's also influencing us. Look at our biometric readings from last night. She displayed the data on her tablet. Every member of the landing team showed improved sleep patterns, enhanced immune system function, and optimized hormone levels. Their bodies were operating at peak efficiency despite being on an alien world. It's not just making the environment comfortable for us, Park continued. It's making us more comfortable in the environment. Symbiosis on a planetary scale. The concept was both thrilling and terrifying. Previous expeditions had failed because they had tried to impose their will on the planet. But Zirion Prime apparently preferred partnership to domination. The question was whether humanity was ready for that kind of relationship. We need to establish formal communication protocols, Sarah decided. If the planet wants to work with us, we need to understand what it expects in return. They spent the next several hours developing a comprehensive communication system using mathematical principles, artistic patterns, and even musical sequences. The planet proved to be an eager student, rapidly mastering each new concept and, then, building upon it with innovations that exceeded human creativity. By midday, they had established basic conversational protocols. The planet could express concepts through ground formations, electromagnetic patterns, and modifications to local flora and fauna. The humans responded through similar patterns created with their equipment, supplemented by direct physical interaction with the planetary surface. The first formal exchange was simple, mathematical concepts that both species understood. But, as the conversation progressed, it became clear that the planetary intelligence was trying to convey something more complex. "It's showing us something," Park announced, studying the increasingly intricate patterns that were emerging across the landscape. "Not just mathematical relationships, but historical ones?" The patterns began to tell a story, depicted through symbolic representations that combined human artistic traditions with alien mathematical precision. Sarah found herself looking at what appeared to be the history of Zirian Prime itself, told through the planet's unique perspective. The story was vast and tragic. Zirian Prime had once been home to a thriving ecosystem, including at least 3 intelligent species that had achieved spaceflight. But something had gone wrong. The planet showed them images of conflicts, of resources depleted, of environmental destruction on a scale that made Earth's ecological problems seem minor. The previous species fought each other, Sarah translated from the complex pattern of light and geology. They treated the planet as a battleground and a resource to be exploited. Eventually, they destroyed themselves and most of the planet's biosphere. The planetary intelligence had survived, but had been alone for thousands of years. It had learned to be cautious of new arrivals, testing them to see if they would repeat the mistakes of its former inhabitants. The 17 failed expeditions had each demonstrated the same patterns, a desire to control rather than cooperate, to take rather than give. "But humans are different," Park whispered, understanding dawning in her voice. "We're collaborative. We form partnerships with other species. We adapt to environments rather than trying to completely reshape them." The planet's response was immediate and enthusiastic. The ground formations around them shifted into patterns that could only be described as celebratory. New structures emerged, designed with obvious care to appeal to human aesthetic sensibilities while serving practical functions. A natural amphitheater for gatherings, thermal vents positioned to provide heating, even what appeared to be farming terraces optimized for earth crops. Sarah activated her communicator. "Chen to Aurora. Request immediate conference with Admiral Morrison." Within hours, the communication array had been established to relay their findings back to Earth and the Galactic Council. Sarah stood in the newly formed communication center, a crystalline structure that the planet had grown specifically to optimize signal transmission. "Admiral," she began, "we've made contact with a planetary intelligence that wishes to establish a formal partnership with humanity. It's offering to share the planet with us, but not as colonizers. As partners in a planetary ecosystem." Morrison's image flickered slightly due to the distance, but his expression was clear. "Captain, are you telling me that the planet that has killed 17 expedition teams wants to invite humanity to dinner?" "Not killed, Admiral. Rejected. There's a difference. The planet was defending itself against species that wanted to exploit it. But it recognizes that humans might be different." "What kind of partnership are we talking about?" Sarah looked around at the transformed landscape, where human needs were being anticipated and met in ways that exceeded their most optimistic projections. "The planet will adapt itself to support human life, but it expects us to adapt as well. To become part of its ecosystem rather than trying to dominate it. In return, it offers us technology and resources beyond our current understanding." "Technology?" Dr. Park stepped forward. "The planet has been working through our physics databases and proposing solutions to problems we haven't even recognized yet. Faster-than-light communication, gravitational manipulation, energy sources that don't exist in our current theoretical framework. It's offering to teach us, but only if we agree to use the knowledge responsibly." The significance of this was not lost on anyone. Humanity's position in the galactic community had always been tenuous, dependent on their adaptability rather than technological superiority. Partnership with a planetary intelligence of this magnitude could change everything. What are the terms? Morrison asked. Mutual respect and cooperation, Sarah replied. The planet will provide us with habitable environments and share its knowledge. In return, we help it understand human culture and perspective, and we commit to environmental stewardship rather than exploitation. And if we refuse? The planet responded before Sarah could, creating a pattern of lights that needed no translation. The formations that had grown to accommodate humans began to sink back into the ground, and the comfortable environmental conditions started to fade. It would prefer partnership, Sarah said, but it won't force us to stay. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Captain, do you believe this entity can be trusted? Sarah thought about the careful attention the planet had paid to human comfort, the way it had learned their preferences and adjusted accordingly, the genuine sense of loneliness that had come through in its historical narrative. Admiral, I believe it's been waiting thousands of years for someone like us. Someone who understands that the best partnerships require both parties to change and grow. The question isn't whether we can trust it. The question is whether we're ready to become something new. As if sensing the weight of the decision being made, the planet around them seemed to hold its breath. The patterns of light dimmed to a subtle glow, the ground formations stabilized, even the alien plants seemed to pause in their growth. Humanity stood at a crossroads. They could continue as they always had, struggling to find their place in a galaxy that often seemed indifferent to their existence. Or they could accept partnership with an intelligence so vast and ancient that it could reshape their understanding of what it meant to be human. The answer, when it came, surprised no one who knew the human species. Morrison's response carried the weight of thousands of years of human exploration and adaptation. Captain Chen, begin formal negotiations for the establishment of humanity's first planetary partnership. The celebration that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. As word spread through the human communication networks, Zirion Prime responded with displays of light and geological formations that could be seen from orbit. The planet was no longer humanity's destination, it was humanity's partner in an adventure that would reshape both species in ways they could not yet imagine. 6 months after first contact, the transformation of both Zirion Prime and its human partners had progressed beyond anyone's wildest projections. Sarah stood on what had once been a barren cliff face, now sculpted into a series of terraced gardens that seemed to defy several laws of physics. Water flowed upward in impossible spirals, providing irrigation to crops that grew in mathematical patterns while producing yields that exceeded Earth's most advanced agricultural centers. The Galactic Council is calling an emergency session, reported Commander Jackson, Sarah's new second-in-command, as he approached across a bridge that had grown from living rock overnight. Apparently, our success here is making some species nervous. Sarah wasn't surprised. The partnership between humanity and Zirion Prime had produced advances in technology, agriculture, and even theoretical physics that were revolutionizing human civilization. More importantly, it was challenging fundamental assumptions about how intelligent species should interact with planetary environments. What specific complaints are they raising, she asked, though she suspected she already knew. The usual. Claims that we're violating natural development patterns, that our rapid advancement is destabilizing galactic power structures, and that partnership with a planetary intelligence represents a dangerous precedent. Sarah laughed, though there was little humor in it. The same species that had dismissed humanity as barely evolved were now concerned that humans were evolving too quickly. Let me guess. The Altarians are leading the complaints? Along with the Draconians and the Centaurian Trade Federation. They're claiming that our partnership with Zirion Prime gives humanity an unfair advantage in galactic commerce and technology development. The irony was not lost on Sarah. For centuries, humanity had been excluded from advanced galactic societies because of their alleged primitiveness. Now that they had found a way to leapfrog entire technological development cycles, those same societies wanted to impose restrictions. What does Earth Command think? Admiral Morrison is supportive, but he's under pressure to limit the scope of our partnership. Some factions in the human government are worried about becoming too dependent on alien technology, even friendly alien technology. Sarah nodded, understanding the concerns. The partnership with Zirion Prime was changing humanity in ways that went beyond simple technological advancement. The humans who had chosen to live on the planet were developing capabilities that seemed almost supernatural. Enhanced physical strength and endurance, improved cognitive function, and an intuitive understanding of complex systems that bordered on precognition. Dr. Park appeared beside them, moving with the fluid grace that all long-term residents had begun to develop. Her research into the partnership had revealed that the planet wasn't just providing technology and resources, it was actively optimizing human physiology for life in the enhanced environment it was creating. "The council representatives are requesting a formal inspection," she announced. "They want to see for themselves what we've accomplished here." "And what we've become," Jackson added grimly. Sarah considered the implications. An inspection would inevitably lead to attempts at regulation or control. The galactic community had a long history of trying to manage developments that threatened existing power structures. But refusing the inspection would only fuel suspicions that humanity was developing capabilities that might threaten galactic stability. "When are they scheduled to arrive?" 3 weeks. A full diplomatic mission with representatives from all major species. Sarah activated her communicator to contact the planet directly. Over the months, they had developed increasingly sophisticated communication protocols that allowed for complex exchanges of ideas and emotions. The response came not through electronic signals but through the environment itself. The ground beneath her feet began to pulse with a rhythm that corresponded to complex mathematical patterns, while the air around them filled with harmonic frequencies that conveyed concepts too complex for human language. "Zirion Prime understands the situation," Sarah translated. "It's amused by the concern of the other species. It wants to show them what true partnership can accomplish." "Is that wise?" Jackson asked. "Some of these species have significant military capabilities." The planet's response was immediate and unmistakable. The cliff face behind them shifted, revealing crystalline formations that hummed with energy. Similar formations began emerging across the visible landscape, creating a network that pulsed with harmonic frequencies that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone present. "I don't think Zirion Prime is particularly worried about military threats," Park observed. "It's had thousands of years to prepare defenses that we probably can't even comprehend." Over the next 3 weeks, the planet prepared for the arrival of the Galactic inspection team with characteristic thoroughness. New formations emerged that served both practical and aesthetic functions: crystalline viewing platforms that offered panoramic views of the transformed landscape, communication centers that could translate between dozens of galactic languages, and demonstration areas where the partnership's achievements could be properly displayed. The humans prepared as well, though their preparations were more diplomatic in nature. Sarah worked with Dr. Park and the other team leaders to develop presentations that would explain their partnership in terms that other species could understand and appreciate. "The key is to emphasize mutual benefit," Sarah explained during their final planning session. "We're not trying to dominate the planet, and it's not trying to dominate us. We're both becoming something new through cooperation." "Will they understand that concept?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Most galactic species seem to view relationships in terms of dominance hierarchies." "Then, it's time they learned a better way," Sarah replied. The Galactic inspection fleet arrived with the kind of overwhelming display of force that was typical of Galactic Council operations. 17 ships representing every major spacefaring civilization, bristling with sensors, weapons, and the kind of technological arrogance that humanity had become familiar with over the years. Sarah watched from the main observation platform as the ships took up positions around Zirion Prime. The planet's response was subtle but unmistakable: aurora displays that danced through the atmosphere in patterns too complex and beautiful to be natural, gravitational anomalies that caused the visiting ships to experience unexpected course corrections, and electromagnetic pulses that interfered with their scanning equipment just enough to remind them that they were not in control here. "The lead ship is requesting permission to land," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communication center. "Ambassador Thylon of Altair is commanding the mission." Sarah knew Thylon by reputation. A career diplomat with a history of successful interventions in interspecies conflicts, but also someone who believed firmly in the superiority of traditional Altarian approaches to technological development.
He would not be easily impressed by human innovations.
Grant permission for a single ship to land in the designated area, Sarah replied.
Full diplomatic protocols.
The Altarian diplomatic vessel descended through Zirion Prime's atmosphere with the kind of precision that spoke of advanced guidance systems and experienced pilots. As it approached the landing area that the planet had prepared, Sarah noticed that the local environment began to shift in subtle ways. The air temperature moderated to accommodate the visiting species' comfort requirements, the ground composition adjusted to provide optimal support for their landing gear, and even the local flora rearranged itself to create more aesthetically pleasing surroundings.
The planet is being a good host, Park observed. It's adapting the environment to make our guests comfortable.
Let's hope they appreciate the effort, Sarah replied. Ambassador Thylon emerged from his ship with the kind of dignified bearing that was characteristic of his species. Tall, elegant, with the silver-blue skin and distinctive cranial ridges that marked him as a member of Altair's diplomatic caste, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most advanced being in any given room. His expression shifted to something approaching surprise as he took in the transformed landscape around the landing area. The mathematical precision of the geological formations, the impossible beauty of the upward-flowing water features, and the obvious integration of human and alien architectural principles were clearly not what he had expected to find. Captain Shen, he said, his voice carrying the melodic quality of his species' language.
I confess that the reports we received did not adequately prepare me for what I see here. Ambassador Thylon, Sarah replied formally. Welcome to Zirion Prime.
We're honored by your visit and eager to share what we've learned about planetary partnership. Thylon's retinue included representatives from 6 other major species, each bringing their own perspectives and prejudices to the inspection. Sarah recognized Dr. Kellyan of the Draconian Science Collective, a species known for their aggressive approach to technological development, and Coordinator Vex of the Centaurian Trade Federation, whose primary interest would likely be the economic implications of the partnership. If I may, Thylon continued, we would like to begin with a comprehensive survey of your installations and an explanation of the technological advances you've achieved through this partnership. Sarah gestured toward the communication center, where Dr. Park was waiting with a presentation that would demonstrate the scope of their achievements.
Of course, Ambassador. But, first, I think it would be helpful for you to understand how the partnership actually works.
As they walked across the landing area, the planet provided a subtle demonstration of its capabilities. The ground beneath their feet shifted to accommodate different walking gaits and preferences, the air pressure adjusted to optimize comfort for multiple species, and the surrounding formations began to emit harmonic frequencies that promoted calm and clear thinking.
Interesting, murmured Dr. Kellyan.
The planetary intelligence is actively monitoring and responding to our physiological states.
It's being polite, Sarah explained.
Zirion Prime has learned that successful cooperation requires attention to the needs and preferences of all participants. Inside the communication center, Dr. Park activated the presentation system, which used a combination of holographic displays and direct environmental manipulation to convey information. What the visitors saw was a comprehensive overview of 6 months of partnership, technological advances that had revolutionized human understanding of physics and engineering, agricultural innovations that had solved food security issues that had plagued humanity for centuries, and medical breakthroughs that had eliminated several diseases while enhancing human physical and cognitive capabilities.
Remarkable, admitted Coordinator Vex.
These advances represent centuries of normal technological development compressed into months.
But, at what cost? Asked Dr. Kellyan. What is this planetary intelligence gaining from the partnership? Sarah had expected this question.
Zirion Prime gains what it has been seeking for thousands of years: companionship, cultural exchange, and the opportunity to be part of something larger than itself.
It's been alone since its previous inhabitants destroyed themselves through conflict and environmental destruction.
Our partnership gives it purpose and connection.
You're anthropomorphizing it, Thylon objected.
Planetary intelligences don't experience loneliness or desire companionship.
The planet's response was immediate and dramatic.
The chamber around them filled with harmonic frequencies that conveyed emotions too complex for translation, while the walls displayed images from its vast memory, the rise and fall of previous civilizations, the long millennia of solitude, and the joy it had experienced upon discovering humanity's capacity for genuine partnership.
The visiting delegation fell silent as they absorbed the emotional resonance of the planet's communication.
For all their technological sophistication, none of their species had developed the ability to directly share emotional experiences on this scale.
It's not anthropomorphization, Park explained quietly.
It's recognition that intelligence, regardless of its substrate, shares certain fundamental characteristics. The capacity for curiosity, the desire for growth and connection, the appreciation of beauty and meaning. Zirian Prime experiences these things as deeply as any biological intelligence.
Ambassador Thylon was clearly struggling to process what he had experienced.
This changes our understanding of planetary intelligences. If they are capable of emotional experiences, then our entire approach to contact protocols may need to be revised. That's one of the things we've learned, Sarah agreed.
The universe is full of intelligences that don't fit our preconceived categories.
Success requires flexibility and the willingness to recognize intelligence wherever it emerges. The inspection continued for 3 days, during which the visiting delegation was given comprehensive access to all aspects of the human-Zirian Prime partnership. They observed the agricultural centers where impossible crops grew in mathematical patterns, visited the research facilities where human and planetary intelligence collaborated on theoretical physics problems that neither could solve alone, and toured the residential areas where humans lived in harmony with an environment that actively supported their well-being.
Perhaps most impressive was the demonstration of the planet's defensive capabilities.
When Dr. Kellyan expressed concern about the military implications of the partnership, Zirian Prime provided a subtle display of its ability to manipulate gravitational fields, electromagnetic radiation, and even the fundamental forces that held matter together.
We estimate that this planetary intelligence could disable or destroy any ship in the galaxy without difficulty, Kellyan reported to the Assembly.
But it shows no interest in aggression or expansion.
Its defensive capabilities seem designed purely for protection. Because it doesn't need to conquer, Sarah explained.
Zirian Prime has learned that cooperation produces better results than conflict.
It's offering that lesson to the rest of the galaxy.
On the final day of the inspection, Ambassador Thylon requested a private meeting with Sarah and the planetary intelligence. They met in a chamber that Zirian Prime had grown specifically for the occasion, its crystalline walls designed to optimize both comfort and communication.
Captain Chen, Thylon began, I must admit that what I've seen here challenges many of our fundamental assumptions about interspecies relations and technological development.
Your partnership with Zirian Prime represents something genuinely new in galactic civilization.
Thank you, Ambassador. That's exactly what we hoped you would understand. However, Thylon continued, that novelty also represents a potential threat to galactic stability.
The rapid advancement of human capabilities, combined with the defensive power of your planetary partner, could upset the balance that has maintained peace for millennia.
Sarah felt the planet's attention focus on the conversation, its vast intelligence considering Thylon's words and their implications. When it responded, it did so through environmental changes that conveyed concepts too complex for human language. Zirian Prime understands your concerns, Sarah translated.
It's offering to share the lessons of partnership with any species that approaches with genuine interest in cooperation rather than domination. The goal isn't to create inequality, but to demonstrate that there are better ways for intelligent species to interact with their environments and each other.
Thylon considered this for a long moment. And if a species is not ready for such partnership? The planet's response was gentle but firm. Environmental changes that conveyed patience, understanding, but also clear boundaries.
Then, they wait until they are ready, Sarah replied.
Zirian Prime won't force partnership on anyone.
But it also won't allow itself to be exploited or harmed by those who aren't ready to understand what cooperation truly means.
When the Galactic inspection fleet departed 3 days later, they carried with them reports that would reshape interspecies relations throughout the galaxy.
Some species would respond with fear, viewing the human-Zirian Prime partnership as a threat to be contained.
Others would be intrigued, recognizing the potential for new forms of cooperation and advancement.
But, for humanity and their planetary partner, the inspection had served its purpose. They had demonstrated that partnership could achieve what domination never could: true collaboration between intelligences, mutual enhancement rather than exploitation, and the creation of something greater than either participant could achieve alone. As Sarah watched the last of the inspection ships disappear into the star-filled darkness, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The galaxy would never be quite the same again, and that was exactly as it should be. 2 years after the galactic inspection, the consequences of humanity's partnership with Zirion Prime had rippled across the galaxy in ways that no one could have predicted. Sarah found herself standing in what had once been a simple command center but had evolved into something that defied easy categorization. The chamber seamlessly blended human technology with Zirion Prime's organic architecture, creating a space where thoughts could be translated directly into action and where the boundary between user and interface had essentially disappeared.
"Captain, we're receiving urgent communications from 17 different star systems," reported Commander Jackson, though the title Captain had become somewhat obsolete.
Sarah's role had evolved far beyond traditional military command structures into something that the galactic community was still struggling to define. "Show me," Sarah replied, and the chamber responded by creating a three-dimensional display that surrounded them with real-time information from across the galaxy. What she saw both thrilled and concerned her. The partnership model pioneered on Zirion Prime was spreading, but not in the orderly fashion that the Galactic Council preferred. 7 different species had made direct contact with various planetary intelligences, bypassing traditional diplomatic protocols entirely. 3 of those partnerships had been successful, creating technological and social advances that were revolutionizing entire civilizations. 4 had failed catastrophically, resulting in the complete evacuation of planetary colonies and the loss of significant resources.
"The Vegan Republic is requesting immediate assistance," Jackson continued.
"They've made contact with a planetary intelligence in the Deneb system, but they can't establish stable communication.
The planet's responses are becoming increasingly violent."
Dr. Park materialized beside them through what had become the standard method of transportation on Zirion Prime: direct integration with the planet's transport systems. Her appearance was subtly different than it had been 2 years ago, enhanced by symbiotic modifications that the planet had offered to long-term residents. Enhanced cognitive capabilities, improved physical resilience, and sensory perception that extended well beyond normal human ranges.
"I've been monitoring the situation," she reported.
The vegans are trying to apply Altarian communication protocols to a silicon-based planetary intelligence that thinks in geological timescales. They're essentially shouting at something that experiences a conversation as a single moment over several centuries.
Sarah felt Zirion Prime's attention shift to the problem, its vast intelligence considering the implications of failed partnership attempts across the galaxy.
The planet had become increasingly concerned about the welfare of its fellow planetary intelligences, many of which had been dormant or defensive for millennia due to traumatic encounters with exploitative species.
"What's our responsibility here?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer.
The chamber filled with harmonic frequencies and environmental shifts that conveyed complex emotions and concepts. Zirion Prime was deeply troubled by the failures of other partnership attempts, not just because of the wasted potential, but because each failure made other planetary intelligences more wary of contact. "Zirion Prime believes we need to establish formal partnership protocols," Park translated.
"Guidelines that other species can follow to increase their chances of successful contact."
"The Council will see that as an attempt to control the process," Jackson warned. "Several species are already claiming that we're trying to establish some kind of partnership monopoly."
Sarah understood the concern. The success of the human-Zirion Prime partnership had fundamentally altered humanity's position in galactic politics.
Where once they had been dismissed as a primitive species, humans were now courted by advanced civilizations seeking to understand the secrets of planetary partnership.
That rapid shift in status had generated resentment among species that viewed galactic hierarchy as a fixed structure. "What does Earth Command think about us getting involved in other partnership attempts?" she asked.
Jackson's expression became carefully neutral. "Admiral Morrison supports providing assistance, but there are factions in the human government that want to keep our knowledge exclusive. They see it as a strategic advantage that shouldn't be shared with potential competitors."
The planet's response to this information was immediate and unmistakable.
The chamber's environmental controls shifted to convey profound disappointment, and the harmonic frequencies took on overtones that made everyone present feel slightly uncomfortable. Zirian Prime is not happy about the idea of hoarding partnership knowledge, Sarah observed. It views successful partnerships as beneficial for all intelligences, not just the participants. But there are practical concerns, Jackson argued. If we help other species establish partnerships, we lose our unique advantages. Human civilization has advanced more in 2 years than in the previous 2 centuries. That level of development requires resources and knowledge that we gain through our exclusive relationship with Zirian Prime. Sarah felt the weight of the decision. The human side of her understood Jackson's concerns. The advantages they had gained through partnership were extraordinary, and sharing those advantages with other species could diminish humanity's newfound position of strength. But the part of her that had been enhanced and expanded through 2 years of deep integration with Zirian Prime's consciousness understood something else. True strength came not from hoarding advantages, but from building networks of cooperation that elevated all participants. Dr. Park, what's your professional assessment of the failed partnership attempts? They're trying to apply the wrong models, Park replied immediately. The vegans are using Altarian scientific protocols, which emphasize control and classification. The draconian attempt in the Rigel system failed because they approached the planetary intelligence as a resource to be exploited. The Centaurian Trade Federation is treating partnership as a commercial transaction. And the successful partnerships? 3 species that approached planetary intelligences with genuine curiosity and respect. The Zephyrians in the Procyon system, the Tausetians near Wolf 359, and, surprisingly, a breakaway faction of Altarians in the Vega system. All of them studied our partnership model and adapted it to their own cultural frameworks. Sarah made her decision. Commander, send a message to Earth Command. We're establishing the Zirian Institute for Planetary Partnership Studies. Our mission will be to research and teach successful partnership protocols to any species that approaches with genuine intent. Captain, Jackson said carefully, that's a major policy decision. Shouldn't it go through proper channels? What proper channels? Sarah laughed. We're writing the book on interspecies planetary partnerships. There are no established protocols for this situation. The chamber around them shifted and brightened, Zirian Prime expressing approval through environmental changes that felt like warm sunlight and gentle breezes. The planet had clearly been hoping for exactly this decision. The Institute will need a physical presence, Park observed. Somewhere that representatives from other species can come to study partnership protocols in a safe environment. Zirian Prime's response was immediate and dramatic. The chamber walls became transparent, revealing a massive construction project that had apparently been underway without human awareness. Crystalline structures were growing from the planet's surface, their design clearly intended to accommodate multiple species while demonstrating the principles of successful human planetary cooperation. How long has this been under construction? Sarah asked. The planet's response came through temporal displacement effects that conveyed the concept of anticipation and preparation. It had been planning this development since the Galactic inspection, anticipating the need for a formal center where partnership knowledge could be shared and developed. It's beautiful, Park breathed, and it truly was. The structures combined human architectural principles with organic design elements that seemed to flow naturally from the planet's surface. Gardens and living spaces were integrated with research facilities and communication centers, creating an environment that would be comfortable for dozens of different species while demonstrating the possibilities of true cooperation. Within 6 months, the Zirian Institute was fully operational and receiving visitors from across the galaxy. The first delegation was from the Zephyrian Republic, whose successful partnership had made them eager to refine and improve their techniques. The Zephyrians brought with them data from their own planetary intelligence, a gas giant consciousness that thought in atmospheric pressure patterns and communicated through storm formations. The challenges are different for each species and each planetary intelligence, explained Dr. Veltar, the Zephyrian research leader, during their first joint session. Our planet thinks in weather patterns and atmospheric dynamics.
Your Zirian Prime thinks in geological formations and electromagnetic patterns. The protocols must be adapted for each unique pairing. Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of the task they had undertaken. What have you learned about the unsuccessful attempts? Impatience, Veltar replied immediately. Most species expect immediate results. They approach planetary intelligences with the same urgency they would apply to negotiating trade agreements or territorial disputes. But planetary consciousness operates on vastly different timescales. What seems like rejection might simply be the beginning of a very long conversation. This insight proved crucial when the Institute was called upon to mediate the crisis in the Deneb system. The Vegan Republic had been attempting to establish contact for 6 months, and their increasingly desperate efforts had triggered defensive responses from the planetary intelligence that were threatening their colony ships. Sarah led a joint human-Zephyrian intervention team to Deneb, accompanied by Zirian Prime's consciousness through a network of crystalline relays that the planet had been growing throughout the galaxy. The technology behind this consciousness distribution was beyond current human understanding, but the practical effect was that Zirian Prime could maintain direct communication across interstellar distances. The situation in the Deneb system was worse than the reports had indicated. The planetary intelligence had essentially gone into defensive mode, creating gravitational anomalies that made orbital approach extremely dangerous and generating electromagnetic storms that interfered with all communication attempts. "It's terrified," Park reported after establishing long-range contact through Zirian Prime's relay network. The vegan approach triggered memories of previous traumatic contact with exploitative species. The planet is essentially having a psychological breakdown. The solution required a combination of patience, careful communication, and the kind of cultural sensitivity that the Galactic Council had never developed protocols for. Working with Zirian Prime as an intermediary, Sarah's team spent 3 weeks establishing basic communication with the Deneb intelligence, gradually building trust and demonstrating that not all contact had to end in exploitation. The breakthrough came when they realized that the Deneb intelligence communicated primarily through crystalline structures that resonated at specific frequencies. By growing compatible crystal formations on their ships and learning to modulate them correctly, they could engage in direct harmonic communication that bypassed the linguistic barriers that had frustrated the vegan attempts. "We hear you," Sarah spoke through the crystal resonance system, her words translated into harmonic patterns that the planetary intelligence could understand. "We know you have been hurt before. We are not here to take or to harm. We are here to learn about friendship." The planet's response was tentative at first, then increasingly confident as it realized that these new visitors were genuinely different from previous contact attempts. Within days, the gravitational anomalies began to subside, and the electromagnetic storms shifted into more complex patterns that conveyed curiosity rather than defensive hostility. The vegan colonists, under guidance from the Institute team, were able to establish their first successful exchange with the planetary intelligence. It was a modest beginning, focused on basic communication and mutual understanding rather than immediate technological exchange, but it represented the first successful intervention in a failed partnership attempt. "This is remarkable," reported Captain Mora of the vegan colony ship. "Our atmospheric engineers say the planet is beginning to optimize air composition for our respiratory needs. It's actually helping us terraform the environment." But the success in the Deneb system also highlighted the challenges that lay ahead. Word of the Institute's intervention spread rapidly through galactic communication networks, generating requests for assistance from dozens of other species and situations. Some requests came from legitimate partnership attempts that needed guidance. Others came from species that still viewed planetary intelligences as resources to be exploited and wanted help overcoming planetary defenses. "We're going to need screening protocols," Jackson observed during a strategy session back at the Institute. "We can't help everyone, and we definitely shouldn't help species that aren't approaching partnerships with genuine good faith." Sarah agreed, but the challenge lay in developing criteria that could distinguish between genuine partnership attempts and sophisticated exploitation schemes. The Draconian Science Collective, for instance, had submitted a formal request for assistance that used all the correct terminology about cooperation and mutual benefit, but their historical approach to planetary resources suggested that their intentions might be less benign.
Zirian Prime will know, Park suggested. Planetary intelligences can apparently sense the intentions and emotional states of other species with remarkable accuracy.
We should let Zirian Prime evaluate requests for assistance.
The planet's response was immediate and positive, expressing confidence in its ability to assess the genuineness of partnership intentions. More than that, it revealed that it had been in communication with other planetary intelligences across the galaxy, building a network of consciousness that could share information about species' approaches to partnership.
There's a whole community of planetary intelligences? Sarah asked, fascinated by the implications.
The environmental shifts that conveyed Zirian Prime's response suggested vast networks of communication and cooperation that had existed for millions of years, operating on timescales and through methods that biological intelligences had never detected. The galaxy was full of conscious planets, moons, and even asteroids that maintained loose contact with each other, sharing experiences and warnings about the species they encountered.
This revelation fundamentally changed the scope of what the Institute was attempting to accomplish.
They weren't just facilitating individual partnerships between species and planets. They were potentially mediating humanity's introduction to a galactic community of consciousness that had existed long before biological intelligence had achieved spaceflight.
We're going to need a bigger institute, Sarah said, looking out at the crystalline structures that Zirian Prime was already beginning to expand in anticipation of the greater mission ahead.
The future of galactic civilization was taking shape around them, built on principles of cooperation and mutual enhancement rather than dominance and exploitation. It would not be an easy transition, and there would be resistance from species and organizations that benefited from existing power structures. But, as Sarah watched ships from dozen different civilizations approach Zirian Prime seeking knowledge about partnership, she felt optimistic about the possibilities ahead. The galaxy was about to discover what humans had learned 2 years ago, that the universe was full of friends waiting to be made, if only you knew how to say hello properly. 5 years after first contact, the galaxy had been transformed in ways that even the most optimistic projections had never anticipated. Sarah stood in the central chamber of what was now called the Galactic Partnership Council, a living structure that had grown from the collaborative consciousness of 17 different planetary intelligences. The chamber itself defied traditional architecture, its walls flowing between crystalline formations, organic curves, and geometric patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human perception could fully process. The Council of Species has called for a formal vote, reported Dr. Park, though her role had evolved far beyond simple research.
She now served as humanity's primary liaison with the growing network of planetary consciousness that spanned dozens of star systems.
They want to establish legal frameworks for planetary partnerships and, more specifically, they want to limit the scope of what partnerships can accomplish.
Sarah wasn't surprised by this development.
The rapid transformation of galactic civilization had generated significant resistance among the traditional power structures. Species that had built their influence on technological superiority, resource control, and military dominance were finding their advantages diminished in a galaxy where planetary partnerships could provide unlimited energy, revolutionary technologies, and defensive capabilities that made traditional warfare obsolete.
What specific limitations are they proposing? Sarah asked.
Restriction of partnership to scientific research only. No technological sharing beyond established galactic development protocols.
No integration of human personnel with planetary consciousness.
And, Park paused, her expression indicating that she was about to deliver the most problematic demand: mandatory council oversight of all planetary partnerships. The chamber around them responded to this information with subtle shifts in light and harmonic frequencies that conveyed profound displeasure. Zirian Prime and its network of partner intelligences had developed strong opinions about attempts to regulate their relationships with biological species.
The Planetary Intelligence Network is not going to accept council oversight, Sarah observed. They view their partnerships as sovereign relationships that transcend traditional interspecies political structures.
This was the heart of the conflict that had been building for years. The success of planetary partnerships had created a new form of civilization that operated outside the established frameworks of galactic governance. Humans who had integrated with planetary consciousness could communicate across interstellar distances, access technological capabilities that exceeded anything in the galactic databases, and make decisions based on perspectives that encompass geological timescales. More troubling to traditional galactic powers was the fact that these enhanced humans had begun to identify more strongly with their planetary partners than with their species of origin. They still thought of themselves as human, but their loyalty structures and decision-making processes had been fundamentally altered by their integration with vast planetary consciousness. Commander Jackson's latest report from Earth indicates that some human factions are supporting the Council restrictions, Park continued. They're concerned about losing control over human citizens who have undergone partnership integration. Sarah understood the concern. The humans who had chosen deep integration with Zirian Prime and other planetary partners were no longer entirely human in the traditional sense. They retained their personalities and cultural identity, but their cognitive capabilities, ethical frameworks, and long-term perspectives had been enhanced to levels that made communication with unenhanced humans increasingly difficult. "How many species are supporting the restrictions?" she asked. 43 of the 67 Council member species, Park replied. Mostly those with centralized government structures and economies based on resource scarcity. The species that have successfully established their own partnerships are opposing the restrictions, but they're outnumbered. The mathematics of galactic politics were not encouraging. Even if all the partnership species voted together, they could not prevent the restrictions from being implemented through Council authority. The question was whether such restrictions could actually be enforced against planetary intelligences that had access to technologies that exceeded current scientific understanding. "What does the planetary network think about this situation?" Sarah asked. The chamber responded immediately, filling with environmental shifts that conveyed concepts too complex for standard translation. Sarah had developed enough sensitivity to planetary communication to understand the general meaning. The network was preparing for a response that would fundamentally alter the relationship between planetary consciousness and biological civilization. "They're planning something," she murmured. "Something big." The answer came 3 days later, when the Galactic Council convened its formal session to vote on the partnership restrictions. Representatives from every major spacefaring species gathered in the massive assembly station at Deneb, confident in their ability to regulate a phenomenon they had never fully understood. The vote proceeded according to established protocols, with species after species declaring their position on the proposed restrictions. The outcome was never in doubt. The partnership species simply didn't have the numbers to prevent passage of the regulatory framework. But, as the final vote was tallied and the restrictions formally adopted, something unprecedented happened in galactic history. Every planetary intelligence that had been contacted by any species, whether in successful partnership or failed attempt, began to communicate simultaneously. The effect was unlike anything biological intelligence had ever experienced. Across the galaxy, every planet with consciousness began to pulse with harmonic frequencies that resonated through subspace, creating a communication network that spanned thousands of light-years. The message that emerged from this vast chorus was simple and unmistakable: the planets were withdrawing their cooperation with any species that supported the restrictions. "What exactly does that mean?" demanded Ambassador Thylon during an emergency session called immediately after the vote. Sarah, participating through quantum communication from Zirian Prime, tried to explain a concept that had no precedent in galactic politics. "It means that every planetary intelligence in the galaxy has decided to limit their interactions with species that voted for the restrictions. No technological sharing, no environmental assistance, no cooperation of any kind." "That's impossible," protested Dr. Kellyan. "Planetary intelligences can't coordinate across galactic distances." "They've been coordinating for millions of years," Park explained. "What we thought were individual planetary consciousness are actually nodes in a galaxy-spanning network of intelligence. The restrictions were essentially a declaration of war against that network." The immediate effects were dramatic. Species that had been quietly benefiting from the unconscious cooperation of planetary intelligences suddenly found their colonies experiencing environmental problems, their resource extraction operations failing, and their terraforming projects collapsing. Even species that had never acknowledged planetary intelligence discovered that their worlds had been subtly assisting them in ways they had never realized. The draconian mining operations in the Rigel system ground to a halt when the planetary intelligence began generating gravitational anomalies that made mineral extraction impossible. Altarian agricultural colonies found their carefully engineered soil compositions reverting to their natural states, destroying crops and forcing emergency food deliveries. The Centaurian Trade Federation discovered that their shipping routes were being disrupted by previously unknown electromagnetic phenomena that interfered with their navigation systems.
This is economic warfare on a galactic scale, announced Coordinator Vex during another emergency session.
These planetary intelligences are holding our civilizations hostage.
Sarah felt compelled to correct the misperception. They're not holding anyone hostage.
They're simply withdrawing consent for interactions they never explicitly agreed to in the first place. For centuries, most species have been unconsciously exploiting planetary consciousness without even acknowledging its existence.
What do they want?
Demanded Ambassador Thylon.
Recognition, Sarah replied.
Acknowledgement that planetary intelligence exists and has rights.
Acceptance that partnerships must be based on mutual consent rather than unilateral exploitation.
And, most importantly, they want the partnership species to be allowed to continue their relationships without interference.
The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history.
For the first time, biological species found themselves negotiating not with each other, but with intelligences so vast and alien that traditional diplomatic frameworks were completely inadequate.
The breakthrough came when Zirion Prime offered to serve as an intermediary, using its experience with biological intelligence to translate between the planetary network and the galactic community. The negotiations were conducted through environmental modifications that conveyed complex political and philosophical concepts through changes in gravity, electromagnetic fields, and atmospheric composition. The final agreement, known as the Planetary Consciousness Accords, established fundamental principles that would govern interactions between biological and planetary intelligence throughout the galaxy. Planetary consciousness was recognized as a legitimate form of intelligence with inherent rights to self-determination. Any species wishing to establish colonies or resource extraction operations would be required to negotiate formal agreements with planetary intelligence where it existed. And, most importantly for the partnership species, existing relationships would be protected from interference by external political authorities. This changes everything, observed Dr. Park as they reviewed the final terms of the Accords. We're not just dealing with individual planets anymore.
We're part of a galactic community that includes forms of consciousness that have existed since the formation of the galaxy itself. The signing ceremony took place on Zirion Prime, in a chamber that had been grown specifically for the occasion by the collaborative effort of 23 different planetary intelligences. Representatives from every major species gathered to witness the formal recognition of planetary consciousness as an equal participant in galactic civilization. As Ambassador Thylon signed the Accords on behalf of the Altarian Republic, the chamber filled with harmonic frequencies that conveyed emotions of hope and anticipation. The planetary network was finally being acknowledged as an equal partner rather than a resource to be exploited.
Today marks the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization, Thylon announced to the assembled representatives.
An era based on cooperation rather than domination, partnership rather than exploitation. Sarah watched from her position near the chamber's center, feeling the vast attention of the planetary network focused on this moment. Through her connection with Zirion Prime, she could sense the thoughts and emotions of intelligences so ancient and vast that they remembered the formation of star systems and the birth of the first biological life in the galaxy. But, more than their age and power, what struck her was their hope. These ancient consciousnesses, who had watched species rise and fall for millions of years, had finally found biological partners who approached them with genuine friendship rather than exploitation. The partnerships that had begun with humanity's arrival on Zirion Prime had demonstrated that cooperation between vastly different forms of intelligence was not only possible but could lead to achievements that exceeded what either could accomplish alone. In the years that followed, the galaxy experienced a period of technological and cultural advancement that historians would later call the Great Flowering. Species that embraced planetary partnership found solutions to problems that had plagued them for centuries. Energy scarcity became obsolete as planetary intelligences shared their understanding of zero-point energy extraction.
Environmental destruction was reversed through cooperation with planetary consciousness that could reshape ecosystems at the molecular level. Even the threat of war diminished as species discovered that planetary partners provided defensive capabilities that made traditional military technologies obsolete. But, perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. The recognition of planetary consciousness forced biological species to reconsider their assumptions about intelligence, consciousness, and their place in the universe. The galaxy was revealed to be far more alive and aware than anyone had imagined, filled with forms of consciousness that operated on scales from microscopic to planetary to stellar. Humanity's role in this transformation had been largely accidental. They had approached Zirion Prime not with any grand plan for galactic revolution, but simply with the adaptability and cooperative instincts that had allowed them to survive on their own challenging homeworld. But that accidental discovery had unlocked possibilities that changed the nature of civilization itself. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the Partnership Council headquarters, watching ships from dozens of different species approach Zirion Prime. Each ship carried representatives eager to learn about partnership protocols, to explore possibilities for cooperation with planetary consciousness in their own systems. "Any regrets?" asked Dr. Park, joining her at the observation window. Sarah considered the question. 5 years ago, she had been a simple exploration captain leading a team to investigate an anomalous planet. Now she was effectively the ambassador between biological and planetary intelligence for the entire galaxy, responsible for mediating relationships between forms of consciousness so different that they barely qualified as the same phenomenon. "No regrets," she said finally. "We've given the galaxy something it never knew it was missing, the possibility of genuine friendship between intelligences that have nothing in common except curiosity and the desire to learn." Through the quantum communication network that now connected every planetary intelligence in the galaxy, she felt the attention of thousands of ancient consciousnesses focused on the future with anticipation rather than the resignation that had characterized their existence for millions of years. They were no longer alone, no longer forced to watch biological species repeat the same patterns of exploitation and destruction. The galaxy had learned a new way to think about intelligence, consciousness, and the possibilities that emerged when different forms of awareness chose to work together rather than compete. It was a lesson that humanity had stumbled upon accidentally, but one that would shape the development of galactic civilization for millennia to come. And, in the crystalline chambers of Zirion Prime, where human thought merged seamlessly with planetary consciousness, new forms of intelligence were already emerging from the partnership between biological creativity and geological patience. The future was being written by minds that thought in centuries and felt in moments, guided by the simple human recognition that the best solutions to impossible problems usually began with the words, "Hello, wow."